Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm doing the Blood Rite Precon Commander Upgrade Guide for the Lost Cavern of Ixalan Commander decks. And this is the Vampire deck. Woohoo! Orzhov Vampires. We're back in Ixalan where we got these Conquistadors, and boy, did we get some awesome cards to add to Vampires in general. I think that this is probably the strongest deck just based on the cards that they included, and if you were to tear this apart, I think this is probably the strongest as well to kind of throw into other decks. Notably, if you didn't see, they reprinted Exquisite Blood in this deck, which was like a $30 card, which is incredible. So it's going to help drop that price, which I think is still running between 20 15 bucks, but it is just a very, very cool deck. And I did have the most cards out of all the commander decks that I decided to cut from this deck to kind of replace with better effects that I think are going to help this deck overall. So who is the commander of this deck? Well, I kept it as the face commander, which is Clavalion, First of the Blessed, which is 1 white-black legendary creature vampire cleric. With whenever you attack, target attacking vampire that isn't a demon becomes a demon in addition to its other types. It gains when this creature dies, draw a card, and create a tap 4/3 white-black vampire demon creature token with flying. So, as I was looking through this deck, I was trying to figure out, like, what are you trying to do in this deck? Because the alternate commander in this deck is Carmen Cruel Skymarch, and I love Carmen. I think Carmen is an awesome commander. She reads 3 white-black legendary creature vampire soldier with flying. Whenever a player sacks a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Carmen Cruel Skymarch and you gain 1 life. Whenever Carmen attacks, return up to 1 target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I decided to stick with the face commander because I think that it works better in this deck. I think Carmen is super cool, but I don't think she quite works the way that you want. It does say whenever a player sacks a permanent, right? So if you end up playing those guys that make everybody sack a permanent, she gets +4/+4 and you gain 4 life. So I think that's super great, but I think that this is a stronger deck if you play it more as an aristocrats deck, just based on the cards I decided to include and also the cards I decided to also include. So that's kind of the way I did it. If that's not what you went for, just hear me out. But let's start out by looking at some of the cards I cut. And I think some of these are going to be surprising, some of them aren't, because I think there's just some better things you can do in this deck. And a lot of the things that I cut have to do with Carmen as a creature overall, and kind of the cards built around her, which I think there was the most out of any of these decks. So starting off, we have Bartolome del Preciado, which is an Orzhov, white-black, legendary creature vampire knight. Sack another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Bartolome de Preciado, or however you say that last name. I think Bartolome is a very, very cool card. First off, you can sack in response to maybe your creature's gonna die, maybe you got a bunch of 1/1s, so you can make him very big. He also cares about artifacts, which is the first time we're really seeing that as well. So I think there's actually a quite likelihood that you could build a super powerful artifact creature sacrifice, aristocrats deck with Bartolome, because he's just your sack engine. He's so cheap that if he dies, he's very easy to recast again and again. But it really doesn't work as well as we want with our commander. It does in the fact that because whenever a creature that attacked that we made a demon dies, we can draw a card and make a 4/3. But I think, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong about this, you want to save up those creatures. And maybe in a big board wipe or after a big attack, you can kind of rebuild your board bigger, stronger, and more threat, by having all of those die. And while Bartolome is going to help you there, I just don't think sacking all of your creatures all the time is going to be that worthwhile. The demon vampires, yeah, they're bigger, they're good, but vampires are known for having awesome abilities on. And if we're being honest, sacking those to get some, redundant creature really wasn't doing it for me. I think that there's way better value from keeping your vampires around and getting value off of their abilities than there is just sacking them all the time. So that's why I decided to cut him, and you'll see a lot of other sacrifice cards I decided to remove for that reason, because I think that just keeping them and then maybe after a board wipe or after a big attack you chump into it, you have a bunch of stuff where you can kind of crack back even bigger and stronger. So next up we have Blade of the Blood Chief. Single mana artifact equipment. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. If an equipped creature is a vampire, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead, equipped for 1. I think that this is probably an underplayed artifact that can really boost up your board, but works very well in this this sacrifice strategy. So same sort of theory. That's why I did not include this in the deck. I think that there's an argument where you do keep this because it's very strong, but I just decided to cut it because I thought there were some other things that I think are more powerful in the long term. Blood Tracker is next. This is a 4 mana, 3, and a black creature vampire wizard with flying. Black, pay 2 life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When Blood Tracker leaves the battlefield, draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on it. There is some life gain in this deck, and I added a lot more, but you're not really gaining enough life, in my opinion, to be able to do this repeatedly. The card draw is super good, but black and white, especially with like weenies here, is actually quite good, and I don't think you need to add more into it. So I just decided to cut this. It was not necessary, and we just don't need it. But next up is Butcher of Malakir, 5 black creature vampire warrior with flying. When Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacks a creature. This is a great card. I'm not going to discount this. If you want to play this, play this. The reason I'm cutting this is because I have played with these kind of sacrifice cards before, where you just make your opponent sack their whole board, and nobody wants to be your friend, and nobody wants to play with you afterwards, unless you have the understanding that you're going to be playing this kind of card. I got into some real trouble with my friends where they almost said, I don't want to play with you ever again, because I was playing too many decks that had, you know, Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact and Butcher of Malakir in it. And for your own sake, you know your play group, know where you're playing. This is not a friendly card. If you're playing a casual game, this is not a casual card, because this is going to make everybody mad, especially if you have all these sack effects in your deck to make it so you're the only one with creatures. Just don't do this unless you know that it's right to do. And I'm being honest, I don't play any of these effects anymore because as a person on the receiving end of this effect, I hate it. It just ruins my whole game. It feels like I just wasted all my time. So I would avoid this card. But if you're playing, you know, in a more competitive pod where this is understood to be, you know, perfectly legitimate, do it. Super strong, put it back in there, but not for me. So next up, we get back to Carmen, Cruel, Skymarch. Like I already said, you know, we already read this card, but, you know, she gets bigger, you gain a little bit of life off of it, and then you can return stuff from your graveyard. And this is the real benefit. I love cards like this, and I will be picking up a copy of this to put in my other decks to help me return stuff in Orzhov to the battlefield. But as a co-commander, you know, there's not going to be too many sacrificing because I removed most of it. So it really doesn't fit in this deck anymore, so I would just say remove it. So next up, we have Etchings of the Chosen. 1 white-black enchantment. As Etchings of the Chosen enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1, and 1 sack creature of the chosen type. Target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. I don't think that this is as good as it kind of is. I think if you're playing a heavy vampire aristocrat strategy where you're making a ton of 1/1s and all that sort of stuff, yeah, it's probably good. Sack a little guy, give something indestructible. But on the other hand, I just got everything that really had to do with sacrificing. I don't think that there's too much in this deck that I'm going to be super worried about dying. I think I'm going to be such a big threat, and I actually want stuff to die anyways, and I'll kind of show that in the cards that I'm including. So I don't think that this is a card I would keep in the deck, but I do think it's a good Orzhov card in general. So keep an eye out for that, I guess. Next, I'm removing Indulgent Aristocrat for a single black creature vampire noble with lifelink. 2 sack a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. This is a good card. I mean, this is one of my favorite cards I have in Edgar Markov. I think it's good, but at the same time, I don't think, you know, you really need to include this with the cards that I included in the deck. It's good. You know, like I said, this was the most powerful out of all of the decks. This is the hardest deck for me to kind of justify, but I would just cut this. I didn't think it was super necessary. And next up, we have Master of Dark Rites, a single black creature vampire cleric with sack another creature, add black, spend this mana, only cast vampire, cleric, and or demon spells. Again, this is actually a pretty decent card, especially in the early game, but I think it's just so weak, and people are going to kind of see it as a engine piece. It's probably going to get removed if they have the ability to remove it, because they're going to see, oh, on turn 2, you were able to, you know, get some good value off of this. I don't think I'd keep this in here, but it is a fun card, so, you know, that's up to you. But the card that I'm going to say just remove regardless is Return to Dust. 2 white instant, exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment. Now, I used to play Return to Dust, and I saw a lot of people talking about this being good, and then in recent, you know, years, I've seen how this has kind of gone down, and how this is just not as good as a card as it once used to be. So if you want to keep this in the deck for that kind of stuff, do it. But I think there's other stuff that's kind of way more threatening that I would have, at a 4 mana slot than this card. So next up, I decided to eliminate 2 lands here. First off is Rogue's Passage. Tap it to add a colorless or 4 target creature can't be blocked this turn. I think there's probably plenty of evasion cards in Vampires where this isn't necessary. Not a huge fan in a deck that really doesn't care about swinging in for 1 billion damage. So I don't think that you need to spend 4 mana to do this. And then next up is Temple of False God. I think that there's plenty of really cheap Vampires so that... yeah, Temple of False God is good, but this deck is just so low on the mana curve wise. I think that you could get away with not including it because if it's one of the lands you keep in your hand and you're not able to get to that 5th land, it could hurt you. But I just decided to cut it from this deck. And lastly, we have Yahenni, Undying Partisan, one of my favorite Vampires, and kind of I removed them for the same reason I removed a lot of these, because it wasn't building around the theme I wanted. And I just want to stress, these are all very good cards. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, Yahenni gets a +1/+1, and you can sack a creature to get indestructible. I think that all of these cards are very, very powerful and very, very good, but it wasn't what I was going for, and you'll kind of see that coming up here. But before I talk about the new cards I'm going to add, I just want to say, if you aren't subscribed and you would like to see more videos like this, please do so. This is my 3rd Precon upgrade guide. I got 1 more coming out in the next couple of days, and I have 2 already on my channel. So if you want to go back and look at the other Caverns of Ixalan decks, see what I decided to add or cut, go and do so. But let's start out by looking at the new cards and kind of explaining my mentality around that. First off, we have a really unique commander here, because what it does is every turn we have to attack, but we're basically getting to put this effect on a creature that when it dies, it comes back. So we have ETB and death triggers that we can take advantage of to kind of drain our opponents in a more aristocrats fashion. So the first card I'm adding here is Bastion of Remembrance, 2 black enchantment. When Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 human white soldier creature token, and whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So the whole theory here is you build up a bunch of these effects on the board that says whenever something dies or when it enters or blah 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 blah, you're going to get to gain a ton of life and drain your opponents for a ton of life. And maybe Vampires isn't the best, but I think that there are a ton of Vampires in this deck that kind of really benefit around this, or make little 1/1s that when they die, whether you use it for chumping or attacking, are just going to help put all of your opponents down while keeping you up. So next up, we have Bloodline Keeper, one of my favorite Vampires from the original Innistrad set. 2 black creature vampire with flying. Tapped, put a 2/2 black vampire creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And for a single black, transform Bloodline Keeper. Activate only if you control 5 or more vampires. And it flips into a 5/5 vampire, Lord of Lineage with flying. Other vampires you control get +2/+2, and still the same effect of tapping to make more tokens. So we're creating all of these tokens. They're getting bigger. Whenever they die, we're going to be getting a ton of value out of them dying. So very, very good. In addition, our commander doesn't care whether or not it's a token or not. So these tokens we're making, we can just stick that ability on. So I really, really love that. Next up, probably one of the most broken vampire, in my opinion, is Captivating Vampire. 1 black creature vampire. Other vampires you control get +1/+1. Okay, that's already fantastic. Tap 5 untapped vampires you control. Gain control of target creature. It becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. That's not just until end of turn. That is just forever. So whatever your opponent has, if it's a combo piece, if it's, their best or biggest creature, just steal it. You can do this at instant speed. So if somebody's going to remove this, let me just tap 5 vampires. And it's just tap, so you can use him even to pay that cost. It is so good. If you're making a ton of tokens like we are, I think that this is the perfect card. Next up, we have Drana Inland Vala. 1 white black legendary creature vampire angel, flying vigilance. Activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Drana Inland Vala has all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. I included this more in the deck as kind of a shutdown card. It prevents your opponents who do have activated abilities from activating them and kind of keeping you ahead of them. So I really like this card, and that's why I included it. But next up, one of my favorite cards from Dominaria United is Elas Ilkor Sadistic Pilgrim. It is just Orzhov to cast, so white and black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Core Cleric with Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So not only do we have that ETB where we gain life, but we have that death trigger, which is just super, super good. Next up is a vampire I don't think I have, and I was researching this and found it and was seriously considering about putting it in my own decks, but it's Necropolis Regent. 3 black creature vampire with flying. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. That just seems good. I don't think I have to explain why that's good. You're either going to get bigger creatures or make your opponents trade into you and take a ton of damage, and then you get something bigger out of it. So I see almost zero downside here. This is a great card. Other than it costing 6 mana, I think this is a cool include. Next up, we have Pawn of Ulamog for 1 black creature vampire shaman. Whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sack this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. So from our normal creatures dying, we're just going to get more tokens that we can just sack at any time to create some more mana to cast even bigger stuff. So love this card. I think this is very good for our strategy. But next up is Sangromancer, 2 black creature vampire shaman with flying. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life. Cool, sounds good to me. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. Not as heavy in this deck. I don't think there's actually any cards that make our opponents discard stuff, but just the sheer fact that we can just gain a ton of life from our opponent's stuff dying is super good, because we have a ton of effects in this deck that care about us gaining life or getting some life and dealing damage based on the amount of life we gain. So I thought this was a good include for that. But to include Exquisite Blood and not include Sanguine Bond, I think is kind of criminal. And Sanguine Bond is 3 black enchantment. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And this triggers an infinite loop, because whenever you gain life, your opponents lose that much life. Whenever your opponents lose life, you gain life. And this will go on and on until your opponent dies. And for a $1 card, whatever it is, wherever you can find it, I don't know why they decided to not include this card in the deck. Maybe just they didn't want to include a combo because people kind of get mad at them. But for $3 at most, this is a awesome combo card that I think you should include. Definitely on the meaner end of the spectrum, but Exquisite Blood is a very expensive card. So in my opinion, if they didn't want you to play Exquisite Blood, they shouldn't have put it in here. But maybe they were trying to also cut that cost down because it was rising pretty heavily. So next up is Vindictive Vampire, 3 and a black creature vampire. Whenever another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain a life. Perfect little Aristocrats card. This is exactly what we want. And now we're going to move into Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, 2 and a black legendary creature vampire cleric with whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Notably, this is also a Sanguine Blood effect, which they also didn't include in the deck, which I don't know why. This one is actually more expensive than Sanguine Bond. It's cheaper, and it also has 3 black creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So you can actually do some other things with this, but it's definitely worth including, especially for all these cards that are going to have you gain life. You can just ping double the damage to help whittle down your opponents even faster. And the last card is not a vampire, but Zulaport Cutthroat, 1 and a black creature human rogue ally. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1. Again, another great Aristocrats card that's just going to help you just drain down your opponent slowly until you can kind of swing in and kill them. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this kind of gave you an idea of where to go with this deck if you bought it for yourself, or maybe you have an entirely different idea of how this deck should be taken apart and built around. I would love to know what you think in the comments down below. Also, if you aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. It would just mean the world to me if you like these videos and wanted to see more of them. It tells me you want to see more of them. I had some really good success doing some commander decks for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and if people like these Precon upgrade guides that I'm doing, I will definitely do more of them as these new sets come out. So thank you so much for watching. If you would leave a like and share this with a friend, it really does help me out. YouTube sees that and helps promote my videos to get more of them out there and more people to see them. So thank you. And today's Scryfall card of the day is Gold Fury Strider. Let's send our vampiric visitors a welcome party, shall we? Anim Pakal 1000 Moon. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.